Hello and welcome to this Deliver section of relationships between school and families, and we are talking about prioritising early help. So we've not really talked too much about early help so far, but it's certainly something that we want to prioritise. And so our key questions today are: how can we make the case for doing this? What might a model of excellence look like for early help, and how can we measure the impact of that? So as you will be very well aware of these documents, both mention in detail the importance of early help, and just a little bit of extra reading that has guided my thought on this session and others is Upstream by Dan Heath and Radical Help by Hilary Cottam. Love to hear your thoughts if you've read either of those as well, but just a little bit of sort of reading around these issues. I've also come across the Early Intervention Foundation, which is one of the work centres. So again, you may be aware of this. But here is a little bit of research from them, which might help you make the case with people who control the purse strings around the case for early intervention. So investing now will save money in the long term. We know that late intervention costs more. So this is the key point that we want to get across. Not doing this early intervention will cost more in the long run. Very much like when we try to make the case for relationships in general, we say that they are inherently valuable and early help is inherently valuable in and of itself, but also it will provide us with some long-term return on investment. And just on the right here are 6 key early intervention approaches that in this report support levelling up, but just are useful generally. And you can see how many of them are to do with schools and early years and education. And I think that speaks volumes about, again, the importance of early help, that we in the education setting are very well placed to deliver this. And we need to be thinking carefully about how we give more resource to it. So what is a model of excellence for early help? Well, I'm going to say that there's 3 things, because I love things in 3s. So there's firstly, of course, the identifying and triaging the children and the families by the level of need that they have, then matching them with a suitable intervention. And again, based on the kind of Upstream and Radical Help books that we saw just at the beginning of the video, co-creation wherever possible is going to be more effective in the long run in terms of getting support and onboarding, if you like, the families and children and young people that we work with, but also because that's the right thing to do for people to build up their own capacity and ownership. And then finally, the rigorous monitoring. We need to be really clear that what we're doing has a start point, it has an end date, it has a clear aim in mind, and we will move towards that. Now, that doesn't mean to say that if after a 10-week programme all the problems aren't fixed, then we just stop, but it means that we have a rigorous and robust process in terms of monitoring how this work is going. Otherwise, it could just sort of go on spuriously for decades. So this is the tiering that happens at Reach, that I'm sure happens in many schools, and certainly again in the evidence for the Early Informed Foundation. It kind of has a really similar table, just like this. So you've got your tier 1 families, which is the kind of universal, then you've got additional needs, then complex needs, then acute needs. And then you can see who this is held by on the left-hand side, and the kinds of services and the kind of issues that there might be on the right-hand side there. And then this is just an example of a much, much wider document that has a whole range of issues on the left-hand side, and then the kinds of things that you would expect to see for children or families who are in that particular box. So if we're talking about self-esteem, in tier 1, we would have all students having this positive sense of self-esteem, whereas if there were additional needs, maybe there'd be a negative sense of self. Complex needs, it would be perhaps resulting in some antisocial criminal behaviour. And finally, if it's really acute needs, then there's real harm or they're at real risk of harm. And just to show you how this goes through for for example, behaviour, social media. Having a really clear idea of what that looks like at each stage will help with the identifying and triaging of where families are and mapping out the need. I also wanted to show you the guidebook from the Early Intervention Foundation, which is an incredible resource. It's sort of like the EEF resource in the sense that they're both what work centres, so they have a similar kind of filter for different programmes. You can select things that are highly effective, so that's 4, or have a high rating, evidence rating at 3, how expensive they are, what exactly they are aiming for, who they are aiming for, and then you can have a look at the kinds of interventions that already exist for that group. And it may be that in particular intervention doesn't happen in your area, but something similar does, and you can find that, and that again will help you to make the case and to build your model of excellence. And then from this guide here, again from the EIF, of what works to improve lives of England's most vulnerable children, and these are some factors to consider when you are trying to work out whether that intervention fits. So you've got the kind of the purple ones, the intervention factors like the content, the format, then you've got the wider system, and then around that you've got the extent to which it can be monitored and evaluated. So those are just some things to consider before implementing a certain intervention. And then finally, how are we going to actually measure the impact of early help? Well, again, this is just from the EIF to think about the effectiveness of different interventions. So all of those that are rated as being a 3 or a 4 are efficient and effective, and you can see how that steps up from there. And we obviously want to be using interventions that are evidence-based and have a record of being effective. So something else to just draw your attention to, I've showed you this before, but when we are putting interventions in place, we want to make sure that we're monitoring. And this is the kind of document that you can see I've adapted here, that we would use at both Dixon's and Reach to work out which students needed what kind of support, what their kind of level of need was. And we would do this as often as we could, weekly, sometimes it ended up being fortnightly, but really kind of going back around those children and if possible, kind of doing it by family, so where there's siblings in a school or across a trust, to work out what the different interventions are. So whistle stop tour there, but how effective are your early help processes? What do you do really well, and what could you be doing better?